If we take the question that's before us, it's actually a two-part question for me. First of all, there's the unexpected benefits part. But the other part that's very important that we need to define in that question is the climate action that we need to see. So I'm going to address both parts. I'm going to start with what's the climate action that we need. So I like very much this visual. I don't know how well you can see it, but these two visuals, they come from a recent scientific study that was published, and it helps us answer the question of why climate action has to be to stay within 1.5 degrees and not 2 degrees. And a way of expressing that is to avoid these tipping points into what is described in the scientific paper as hot house Earth. And so if you can see our planet as it sits originally in that space which David Attenborough describes as the Garden of Eden. It's not too warm, it's not too cold. It allowed for our civilization to develop. And you can see that that track is now going towards the left. It's getting warmer. And the risk that we have, as Al Gore expresses it very well, is that we're going to lose the grasp of our planet, and it's going to fall into hot house Earth. When at that level, the climate change will just accelerate more and more, and it will be completely uncontrollable. We know we're leaving the Holocene, and we're coming into the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is this period of time that we're in, which humans are dominating. And so, just to mention a couple of the tipping points, that if we go as close to as 2 degrees warming that we risk triggering, there are things like the melting of the Greenland ice cap and melting of permafrost, which leads to more and more global warming. So the good news, though, is that there's not one, there's not two, there's not three, there's actually 5 plans of how we can do this, how we can stay within 1.5 degrees. So I'll talk a little bit about those first, and then we'll talk about the unexpected benefits. And please do interrupt me if you have questions or you want me to clarify anything in particular. So the first one is Project Drawdown from Paul Hawken. So this is an effort. So all these plans are science-based. Over 60 researchers were basically tasked with going out there and finding what are the solutions to reversing global warming. And they went through all the peer-reviewed literature from their own experiences as well as researchers, and they mapped and measured and modeled what were the most substantive solutions to reverse global warming. So what global warming is, what reversing is, I don't know if you can see this, I don't think this, I can't use the pointer, but if you see, this is the increase of the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And you can see that it's going up dramatically. Who knows why it's always like a seesaw? It's that we have each year. Yes, it's because of the seasons and the northern hemisphere. When the vegetation comes round, the concentration drops, and then it goes back up again, and so on. But it's going up. So the point of drawdown is the point in time when we will start decreasing the concentration. So it's in green here, and it's when the atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations start to go down on a year-to-year basis. We may have reached 1.6, 1.7 degrees warming, but the moment that happens, it'll start going down. And the way to do that, of course, is to stop the emissions or reduce them dramatically, and on the other hand, start sequestering through natural climate system, the climate solutions, sequestering the carbon, so that we start to draw down from the atmosphere greenhouse gases. These are 100 solutions. As you mentioned, there are 80 of them that have been modeled in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions that they reduce. What are the net savings and what are the net costs for those 80? And here we can see that drawdown has now been translated into French and German, Dutch, Portuguese, and there will be versions in Spanish, Chinese, etc., in Cantonese. The second one is the Exponential Climate Action Roadmap, which comes from Professor Rockstrom at the Stockholm Resilience Institute, came around with what he describes as the carbon law, which is that we need to have emissions every decade. And it's based on that, and the Exponential Climate Action Roadmap proposes that we do that for energy supply, industry, buildings, transport, food consumption, agriculture, and forestry. And the approach there is to, in this more positive narrative that we're coming into, is not to tell people what not to do, but tell people more what they should do, and favoring those technologies that are carbon-free or very low carbon. And so the exponential growth that will come from those solutions are the ones that are going to mean that we'll be able to cut those emissions. And it comes, there are plenty of drawdown solutions that are actually included in this exponential roadmap. So that's one of the plans, and it's till the next decade, so that's also important. Drawdown is out to 2050, over 30 years. This is very concrete, and it's for the next 10 years, 11 years. Another one is the Solutions Project that comes from research from a group that's headed by Mark Jacobson at Stanford. And he's come up with the 100% renewables and basically the electrification of everything, sometimes in hybrid mode with hydrogen that comes from electrolysis, which is produced cleanly. And he published a paper which demonstrates how we can get to 100% renewables, 139 countries, and electrify basically all different types of industry by 2050. And it's focused on fossil fuel substitution and so on, and the work of over 85 researchers over 10 years. And this has just come out. It's a team at a university in Australia, and it's supported by the Leonardo DiCaprio, the DiCaprio Foundation, that also supported Project Drawdown, and they've just published the One Earth climate model. And you can see what I've just been describing in terms of what needs to be done in terms of reversing global warming, is that you see in gray, that's basically the emissions from fossil fuels and cement, and that it needs to come down dramatically. And what's under the curve, what's under the zero, is negative, and that's favoring natural climate solutions. So that's where, in their case, what they've done is using very sophisticated computer modeling and running different simulations. They also, and that's what's interesting, is that all these science-based plans are all researched and are reinforce each other. So they also, their research shows that we can get to 100% renewable energy by 2050. Protection and restoration of 50% of the world's lands and oceans is also needed, and a transition to regenerative agriculture. All of this by 2050. And last but not least, by any means, is the recently published report by the IPCC that is based, of course, on all the researchers that participated in in that work, and all the scientists. And the reason, though, that I've also put it last, as it were, is that if you look at, and so this is in a very summarized form, what are the 5 steps to 1.5 degrees that was published on the BBC. You have the global emissions of CO2 need to decline by 45%. The renewables are estimated to provide up to 85% of global electricity by 2050. Coal is still expected to be in the mix in 2050, and they rely very much on something that's called BECCS, or energy crops, which is bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. And there's a lot of questions. You evoked the moral and ethical aspects. Okay, so just a few more minutes. Okay, so anyway, all of these 5 plans mean that we can stay if we do all of these things. Now, this is, of course, a massive undertaking. It's a huge transformation of how we transport ourselves, how we work, and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to pick some examples, and this is where Nicolas as well, this fits in perfectly, of course, with La Genève Internationale that we are, and the sustainable finance et la finance qui est on the other side of the of the lake. So we have human rights and SDGs, for instance. It's all about human rights and SDGs. I'll just mention two of the drawdown solutions, one of which is the indigenous people's land management and educating girls, as 2 examples which obviously have very much to do with human rights and SDGs and contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration. So on the financial, I just have some examples. So drawdown says that we can save 74.2 trillion at a cost of 29.6 trillion. Now, I just wanted to use 2 examples. One is solar farms. So on the left, we have the 5.02 trillion. Now, those are the net savings, right? And the net costs are negative, which means that actually, over 30 years, we will save 80 billion by doing solar farms rather than fossil fuel powered energy. This is very impressive, but to come back to what Cristiana Figueres said about the vested interest, if you look at the number of the savings, the 5 trillion, that's money we're not spending on fossil fuels. So we understand very clearly where that concern is. And in regenerative agriculture, it's the synthetic inputs. So that number of 1.93 trillion, a lot of it is synthetic inputs. So again, we have to be very aware of that. Stabilization of energy prices and saving $85 per person per year in energy costs, that comes from the Solutions Project. Annual savings of 28.5 trillion in health and climate costs. Now, you might say, okay, it actually isn't an unexpected benefit. We did expect that there would be those benefits. But I think it's the size of the benefit that is very exciting from all of our perspectives. 28.5 trillion in health and climate costs savings. Now, in terms of the economic impacts, if you look at this graph at the bottom, this was something that was published not so long ago, and you can see the blue line is the green economy, and the red line is fossil fuels. Now, the green economy here now is representing $4 trillion, and it's growing massively. Albeit in the green economy, we have much more than just energy. We also have agriculture, food, and so on. But the trend is there. And in terms of the economy, the new green economy of the future that is growing exponentially is renewables, plant-based foods, sustainable agriculture, electrify everything, etc. And that comes us comes to us from the Exponential Climate Action Roadmap. And in terms of social, I'll just mention just a few quickly, also because of just how massive they are. In terms of from the Solutions Project, for instance, again, net increase of over 24 million long-term jobs, an annual decrease in 4.7 million premature deaths from air pollution, and 30 million people currently working in the energy sector, which with permanent, well-paid jobs, etc., and an additional 12 million new jobs, and that comes from the One Earth climate model. And another example of that is the increased access to distributed energy by up to 4 billion people. So I leave to you also.
Just 2 minutes on scaling up. It's really important.
Okay, all right. Well, actually, I sort of wanted to turn this question up to you as well, if you'd like. But that's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of the panelists.